At 11:25 in the morning on April 15, 1944, Second Lieutenant Robert L. Booth was plunging toward Germany at 500 miles per hour. By every practical measure, he was already a dead man. He simply had not realized it yet. 19 years old, strapped into the cockpit of Republic P-47D Thunderbolt serial number 42 to 75,213, he was seconds from impact. He had pushed the fighter into a near-vertical dive, chasing a German Focke-Wulf 190 that had rolled inverted and split for the deck. Booth followed without hesitation. It was the kind of decision inexperienced pilots made once. The P-47, known as the Jug, was the heaviest single-engine fighter in the war. Fully loaded, it weighed more than 17,000 pounds. When something that massive points straight down and unleashes 2,000 horsepower, it does not glide. It accelerates like a steel weight dropped from a tower. Booth locked both hands around the control stick. Sweat soaked through his leather gloves, making the rubber grip slick. He pulled back with everything he had. His arms trembled. His neck muscles stood out against his collar. The stick would not budge. It felt welded in place. The nose of the Thunderbolt stayed fixed on the ground below, aimed at a muddy field outside Hanover. At this rate, he would arrive in about 12 seconds. He kicked the rudder pedals. They did not respond. He tried to bank with the ailerons. Nothing moved. The airplane had gone rigid. Booth had crossed into a part of flight few pilots in 1944 understood, and even fewer escaped alive. The phenomenon was called compressibility. Once the P-47 passed 450 miles per hour, airflow over its thick laminar wings accelerated beyond the speed of sound. Shock waves formed along the upper surfaces. Those shock waves disturbed the airflow over the tail, blanketing the elevators in dead, turbulent air. The center of lift shifted backward, forcing the nose down with a strength no human arms could counter. The Thunderbolt was no longer a fighter. It was a lawn dart. The German pilot ahead of him counted on this. Diving was a standard Luftwaffe escape tactic. Their lighter aircraft could recover from high-speed plunges. The heavier American Jugs would hit the compressibility barrier and drill into the earth. It was a trap built on physics, and Booth had flown straight into it. The altimeter needle spun downward. 15,000 feet, 12,000, 10,000. The cockpit shook violently. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp howled at full power. The propeller tips were nearing supersonic speed, producing a roar that vibrated through the entire airframe. The canopy frame rattled, rivets chattering like gunfire. Booth was a farm kid from Pennsylvania, not a test pilot, not an ace. He fixed tractors for fun. Now his machine was trying to kill him. Cold panic gripped his chest. He remembered the procedure. Reduce throttle. Let thicker air slow the aircraft. But the ground was rising too fast. There would not be enough altitude for the air to save him. He needed drag. He needed to bleed speed immediately. His hands swept across the cockpit, searching for the flap lever. The P-47 did not carry dive brakes. Flaps were the only option. If he could deploy them, maybe the added drag would pull him below the critical Mach number and collapse the shock waves. But the aircraft was vibrating so hard his vision blurred. He reached toward the yellow-handled lever on the left side panel. His hand missed by inches. Instead, he grabbed the heavy metal lever beside it, the landing gear control. In a P-47, extending the landing gear at speed was strictly forbidden. The technical manual printed the warning in bold red letters. Do not lower gear above 200 miles per hour. At higher speeds, the hydraulic actuators could not force the heavy wheels into the airstream. Worse, the wind could tear off the gear doors, twist the wings, or rip the airplane apart. Booth was doing 520 miles per hour when he shoved the lever down. What followed contradicted every calculation Republic Aviation engineers had made. The hydraulic system, charged to 1,000 pounds per square inch, came alive. The uplocks released. The massive main gear assemblies, each carrying 42-inch tires, began to extend from the wings. The noise was explosive. A single violent bang. The aircraft jolted as if it had struck a wall. The gear doors hit the slipstream and became enormous air brakes. The drag on the sleek fighter multiplied instantly. Booth was hurled forward into his shoulder harness so hard that the straps carved bruises into his chest. His head snapped down, chin smashing into the top of the control stick. In an instant, The forces shifted from crushing positive load to abrupt negative strain. But outside the cockpit, the physics changed. The extended landing gear acted like an anchor in the air. Speed bled off rapidly. 500 miles per hour. 450. 400. As the velocity dropped, the shock waves along the wings dissolved. Airflow over the tail stabilized. The blanketing turbulence around the elevators disappeared. The control stick suddenly felt alive in his hands. The nose of the P-47 surged upward on its own. Booth was not pulling. The aircraft was reacting naturally to the huge drag now hanging below its center of gravity. The fighter tried to loop. Booth wrestled the stick, fighting to keep the wings level as G-forces crushed him back into his seat. Blood drained from his head. His vision dimmed to gray. He groaned through clenched teeth and performed the M1 maneuver, tightening his body to keep blood in his brain. Slowly, the horizon returned. Moments earlier, brown earth had filled the windscreen. Now it slid beneath him. He leveled out at 3,000 feet. He was still flying. His entire body was trembling. But he was breathing. He was alive. Booth stared down at the instrument panel. The airspeed needle was settling at 250 miles per hour. He checked the landing gear indicator lights. 3 green. The gear was fully down and locked. He had thrown the wheels into the slipstream at more than 500 miles per hour, and somehow they were still attached. He scanned the sky for the German fighter. The Focke-Wulf was nowhere in sight. The pilot had likely leveled out long ago, convinced the American had drilled straight into the ground. Booth's hand, still shaking, reached for the gear handle and lifted it. The wheels retracted with a heavy thud into the wells. The Thunderbolt, arguably the most rugged fighter in the war, settled back into smooth flight as if the last 30 seconds had never happened. He turned west toward England. He did not call his flight leader. He did not report anything. He said nothing at all. Inside the cockpit, there was only the steady hum of the Pratt & Whitney engine and the ringing in his ears. He replayed it in his mind. He had not executed a brilliant maneuver. He had panicked. He had grabbed the wrong lever. He had nearly torn his own airplane apart. And in the process, he had stumbled onto a solution to the Luftwaffe's most lethal escape tactic. As Bachstedt came into view, a new kind of fear settled over him. He would have to explain this. He would have to tell his crew chief why the hydraulic fluid smelled scorched and why the tires carried strange stress marks from being forced into the airstream at insane speed. He would have to admit to his commanding officer that he had broken every operating limitation written in the manual. What he did not know was that he was not heading toward a court-martial. He was walking into something far bigger. When he taxied into his revetment, Sergeant Miller climbed onto the wing before the propeller had fully stopped turning. Miller studied the young pilot's face. Pale, eyes wide, sweat darkening his collar. "Lieutenant," Miller asked, "you all right? You look like you saw a ghost." Booth unfastened his mask and inhaled the cold English air. "Chief," he said, his voice unsteady, "you might want to inspect the landing gear trunnions. I think I bent them." "Bent them how? You did not even land yet." Booth glanced at the thick metal gear lever inside the cockpit. "I did not land," he said quietly. "I used them as brakes." Later, the maintenance report sat between them on Captain James Johnson's desk like evidence in a trial. Johnson, Booth's flight leader and a veteran with 8 confirmed kills, tapped the paper with a nicotine-stained finger. His expression was not anger. It was confusion. In the 56th Fighter Group, confusion usually preceded bad news. "Lieutenant," Johnson said in his gravelly voice, "my crew chief tells me your hydraulic fluid is cooked. Says it smells like burnt toast. He also tells me the main tires show stress along the sidewalls." He looked directly at Booth. "How exactly do you overheat a landing gear system at 20,000 feet? Were you trying to park on a cloud?" Booth swallowed. The surge of adrenaline from the flight had drained away, replaced by the cold weight of military discipline. He had violated the pilot's operating handbook. That could end a flying career. "Sir," Booth answered evenly, "I hit compressibility." Johnson's expression tightened slightly. "I was in a terminal dive chasing a Focke-Wulf. The controls locked. I could not pull out." Johnson gave a slow nod. He understood the compressibility corner. He had buried friends because of it. And then? He asked. "I panicked, sir. I went for the flaps." Booth paused. "I grabbed the wrong handle. I dropped the gear." The room went quiet. A few pilots who had been playing cards nearby stopped and turned toward them. Lowering landing gear at combat speed was not just careless. It was reckless. It was like slamming a transmission into reverse at highway speed. You lowered the gear, Johnson repeated. At what airspeed? The needle was past 500, sir. And the wings did not come off. No, sir. It slowed me down. The shock waves broke up. I recovered at 3,000 feet. Johnson leaned back in his chair. He picked up a small Model P-47 from his desk and spun its propeller absently, calculating. Drag. Structural load. Hydraulic pressure. It should not have worked. The struts should have failed. The actuators should have ruptured. The aircraft should have disintegrated. Yet the Thunderbolt sat outside in the revetment, intact. And Booth was standing in front of him alive. Go get some food, Lieutenant, Johnson said at last, tossing the report aside. Do not discuss this with anyone. He paused. I need to make a call. The 56th Fighter Group was commanded by Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke. The unit called itself the Wolf Pack, and Zemke was its undisputed leader. He was sharp, disciplined, and analytical. To him, air combat was governed by physics, not luck. The next morning, Johnson brought Booth into Zemke's office. The atmosphere was tight. Zemke listened without interruption as Booth described the dive, the lockup, the mistake. He paced the room slowly, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the floor. Finally, he stopped in front of a technical diagram of the P-47D pinned to the wall. Let me understand this, Zemke said, turning toward the young pilot. You are telling me the landing gear functioned as a dive brake? Yes, Colonel. And you are telling me the aircraft remains airworthy? Sergeant Miller reports stress on the trunnions, sir, but the main spar is intact. Zemke shifted his gaze to his engineering officer, Major David Schilling, who stood against the doorframe. Schilling was an ace and knew the Thunderbolt inside and out. Dave, Zemke asked calmly, is that even possible? Schilling reached into his pocket and pulled out a slide rule. Schilling had already run the numbers before he stepped into Zemke's office. Johnson had called him the night before, and he had been calculating ever since. In theory, Colonel, Schilling said evenly, the main wheels are 42 inches across. The gear doors are essentially flat panels. If you shove that into a 500-mile-per-hour slipstream, drag increases by roughly 400%. It is comparable to deploying a small drogue chute. Zemke did not blink. Will the hydraulics survive it? Republic designed the system to handle pressure spikes up to 3,000 pounds per square inch, Schilling replied. It would be marginal, but if both gear legs extend evenly, the system should hold. It would function as a very large air brake. Zemke turned back toward Booth and studied him carefully. The lieutenant was still pale, but his account had not wavered. Zemke understood compressibility better than most. The Germans had turned it into a weapon. The split S maneuver was bait. They dove hard, knowing the P-47 would follow and lock up. American pilots died because of it. If this kid had accidentally found a way through that wall, it changed everything. Lieutenant, Zemke said calmly, you believe you can repeat this? Booth felt his stomach tighten. Repeat it, sir. If this is a tactic, it must be reliable. We do not build doctrine on accidents. I need to know whether the gear will deploy at high speed consistently without tearing the aircraft apart. Zemke stepped back to his desk and pulled a flight schedule toward him. He wrote a name. Tomorrow morning. 0800. You are going up. Take AP-47 to 25,000 feet. Roll over into a terminal dive. When you reach control lockup, lower the landing gear. Booth felt the blood drain from his face. Surviving at once in panic was one thing. Doing it deliberately, watching the Earth rush closer, waiting for the controls to freeze, was something else entirely. Sir, Booth managed, what if it fails? Zemke met his eyes. His voice was steady, almost casual. Then we will confirm it was a fluke, and we will name the crater after you. It was dark humor, but in 1944 that was normal. That night, Booth did not sleep. He lay in the darkness listening to the breathing of the other pilots in the barracks. He replayed the mechanics in his head. The P-47 hydraulic pump was engine-driven. It forced fluid through steel lines into actuators that moved the gear. At 200 miles per hour, air resistance was minor. At 500, the wind exerted thousands of pounds of force. It would be a contest between hydraulic pressure and raw aerodynamic load. If the hydraulics won, the gear would extend and he would slow down. If the wind overpowered the system, The gear could shear off the wing structure, tumble into the tail, destroy the elevators, and turn the airplane into a tumbling projectile over England. Booth finally got up and walked to the mess hall. He found Major Schilling there, drinking black coffee. "Major," Booth asked quietly, "can we reinforce the lines? Just in case?" Schilling studied him for a moment, then poured him a cup. "Already done," he said. "We replaced the seals on your aircraft tonight. Fresh fluid. We also installed a camera in the gun bay." Booth blinked. "You are filming it?" Schilling nodded. "Every second. Do you think I am crazy, Major?" "I think you are scared," Schilling replied. "And that is good. Scared pilots check their instruments. Crazy pilots do not come back." He took another sip of coffee. "If this works, Lieutenant, you are going to save a lot of lives. Possibly mine." April 16th, 1944. 0800. Booth climbed into the cockpit. Normally, the familiarity of the controls steadied him. Today, they felt like switches on an execution device. He tightened his shoulder harness until it bit into his collarbone. He wanted no slack. "Wolfpack leader to test 1. Zemke's voice came through the radio. "Radio check. Test 1 loud and clear," Booth answered. His voice sounded higher than usual. "All right, son," Zemke said. "Let us conduct some science." They lifted off and climbed through the overcast. At 15,000 feet, they broke into bright sunlight and continued upward to 25,000. The air thinned. The temperature dropped. "Level off," Zemke ordered. "I am moving to your 3 o'clock. Camera is rolling." Booth glanced right. Zemke's silver and blue Thunderbolt slid into position. The camera port in its wing looked like a dark eye. "Here is the profile," Zemke continued. 70-degree dive. Full throttle. Do not adjust trim. Allow speed to build to 450 indicated. Confirm control lockup. Then extend gear. "Copy," Booth said softly. He looked down through a break in the clouds. The English Channel was visible below. It looked unforgiving. Starting run in 3, 2, 1. Booth pushed the stick forward. The nose dropped. The horizon vanished. The engine roared. Gravity took over. 300 miles per hour. Wind noise increased. 350. The airframe began to tremble. 400. The controls stiffened. It felt as though cement was hardening around the stick. Speed 420, Booth reported. Controls heavy. "Continue," Zemke replied calmly. 450. The aircraft began to buffet violently. Shock waves were forming again. Booth tested the stick. It would not move. "Controls locked," he called. No elevator response. "Deploy gear," Zemke ordered. "Now." Booth's hand hovered over the lever. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong. Lowering the gear at this speed violated everything he had been taught. It felt reckless. It felt destructive. But he had his orders. He wrapped his hand around the heavy metal handle, squeezed the release, and forced it down. The impact was not mechanical. It was structural. The sound was like a sledgehammer striking the underside of the cockpit. When the thick rubber tires and flat steel gear doors slammed into a 450-mile-per-hour slipstream, the Thunderbolt did not merely decelerate. It felt as if it had caught an arresting cable on a carrier deck. Drag multiplied instantly. Booth was hurled forward into his harness with brutal force. The straps bit into his collarbones hard enough to leave dark bruises that would linger for days. His head snapped downward, chin smashing against his chest, the impact knocking the breath out of him. 500 yards away, Colonel Zemke watched from the chase aircraft. Where Booth felt chaos, Zemke saw mechanics at work. The P-47's nose snapped upward. It was not a controlled pull. It was violent and automatic. The enormous drag below the center of gravity acted like a hand grabbing the aircraft from underneath and jerking it backward. The nose kicked up sharply, reducing the dive angle and tearing apart the unstable transonic airflow clinging to the wings. The shock waves vanished. Airflow over the tail stabilized. The elevators regained authority almost instantly. "Recovery," Booth shouted into his oxygen mask, his voice strained as positive G-forces slammed back into him. "I have control." Pulling out. He hauled the stick back. The Thunderbolt clawed out of the dive at 12,000 feet, the airframe groaning under load, wings flexing but intact. Zemke dropped lower to inspect the underside. "Test 1, I am looking at your belly," Zemke transmitted, calm and analytical. "Gear doors intact. Struts appear straight. No visible leaks." "You did not lose them?" "Roger, Wolf Pack leader," Booth answered, wiping sweat from his eyes. "Though I may have bent the seat." They returned to Boxstead. Booth raised the gear. The indicator lights came up green. The system had survived. Once on the ground, the maintenance crew swarmed the aircraft. Major Schilling slid under the wing with a flashlight before the engine had fully cooled. He examined the hydraulic cylinders and ran his hand along the heavy steel trunnions anchoring the gear to the wing spar. "Well?" Zemke asked, removing his gloves. Schilling straightened, wiping grease from his fingers. "Stressed, yes. We lost a couple of seals. But structurally, it held. Republic built this airplane like a bridge, Colonel. It absorbed the load." Zemke gave a slow nod and turned toward the cluster of pilots gathered nearby. They were waiting for the verdict. "Gentlemen," Zemke called out, his voice carrying across the line, "we have a new maneuver." He paused. "It is not pretty. It is violent. And if you do it incorrectly, it will kill you." The men listened closely. "But if you do it correctly, it is the only reliable way out of a compressibility dive." By the next morning, the hierarchy inside the 56th Fighter Group had shifted. Normally, seasoned aces lectured rookies on survival. Now a 20-year-old farm kid with no kills stood at the front of the room. Booth faced a chalkboard filled with crude aerodynamic sketches. He drew a drag vector and tapped it with the chalk. "The key," he explained, his voice unsteady at first as he addressed men whose faces appeared in newspapers, "is timing. Do not wait for 500 indicated. At that speed, the hydraulic pump may not overcome the pressure. Drop the gear the moment the stick freezes." From the back of the room, Major Francis Gabby Gabreski, the group's top ace, raised his hand. "And if the hydraulics fail?" Gabreski asked. "If the gear will not retract afterward, you are a slow target over Germany." "Then you fly home slow, Major," Booth answered, finding steadiness in his voice. "But you fly home." Zemke stepped forward and placed a hand on Booth's shoulder, a public show of confidence. "This is now standard procedure in the 56th, Zemke declared. "We will call it the gear brake maneuver." He let the word settle. "This is for emergency compressibility only. It is not for shortening a strafing run. It is not for tightening a turn. If anyone abuses it and damages an aircraft, I will ground you myself." Word spread quickly. In 1944, pilots exchanged stories everywhere: London pubs, transfer points, training fields. "Have you heard what Zemke's group is doing? They dropped the gear in a dive." Insane? Perhaps, but they were no longer crashing. Within weeks, the 4th Fighter Group and the 78th were experimenting with it. It had not yet been printed in official Army Air Forces manuals. That would require layers of review at Wright Field. But it existed in the unofficial manual, the one passed quietly from survivor to survivor. Across the channel, the Luftwaffe would soon discover that their dependable physics trap no longer worked. Oberleutnant Karl Heinz, veteran of the Western Front with 34 victories, knew Allied aircraft well. The P-47 was fast, heavily built, and difficult to destroy. It also had a weakness: high-speed dives. At 22,000 feet, he found a Thunderbolt closing in on his 6. He was not concerned. He rolled his Focke-Wulf 190 inverted and pulled into a steep powered dive toward the deck. "Follow me, American," he thought. His airspeed climbed. 700 kilometers per hour. 800. He glanced back. The silver Thunderbolt remained behind him, growing larger in his mirror, 8 machine guns flashing in the sunlight. "Foolish American. You are too fast. You will lock up." Heinz waited until the ground began to rush upward to meet them. At 2,000 meters, Heinz yanked back on the stick. The Focke-Wulf 190 responded exactly as he expected. Its compact, rigid wings and balanced controls bit into the air. The aircraft arced upward under heavy G-forces and leveled just above the treetops. He glanced over his shoulder, anticipating a plume of smoke where the American had buried himself in the countryside. Instead, he saw something that made no sense. The P-47 was still airborne. Its landing gear hung fully extended, like talons reaching downward. The Thunderbolt had bled speed abruptly in midair. Its nose snapped upward instead of continuing toward the ground. It had not impacted. It had stopped. Then, as the American pilot raised the gear, the Pratt & Whitney engine thundered back to full power. The P-47, now free of excess velocity and clear of shockwave lockup, settled directly behind the slower German fighter. Heinz had no time to process what he was seeing. 850 caliber machine guns erupted. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds tore through the Focke-Wulf's fuselage. The aircraft fragmented into burning debris and twisting metal. Fuel ignited. The fighter disintegrated. Above the wreckage, Captain Robert Johnson steadied his Thunderbolt and watched the pieces fall away. He pressed the transmit button. "It works, Booth. It really works." In that moment, the escape maneuver that once saved German pilots became a liability. The dive trap had been neutralized and turned into an attack position. The war ended for Robert Booth in May 1945. He did not return home to parades or newspaper headlines. The public attention belonged to men like Patton and Eisenhower, or to the atomic bomb that ended the conflict in the Pacific. No one printed front-page stories about hydraulic systems or compressibility effects. Booth folded his uniform into a trunk and put it away. He pulled on denim overalls and returned to the family farm near Allentown. He married Mary, the girl he had known since high school. He took a job at the local John Deere dealership, repairing tractors that failed in muddy fields. For the next 4 decades, the man who had altered high-speed flight tactics spent his days coated in grease, rebuilding carburetors and servicing hydraulic lines on farm equipment. He rarely discussed the war. When he did, he mentioned the damp cold of English winters, the taste of powdered eggs, or the friends who never came back. He never told the mechanics at the dealership that his discovery had spared hundreds of pilots. He never said that his name had once circulated quietly through briefing rooms across Europe. To his neighbors, Bob Booth was a quiet, reliable mechanic who could coax life out of stubborn engines. But far above the cornfields, his influence endured. By the 1950s and 60s, speed brakes were standard equipment on American jet fighters. The North American F-86 Sabre used fuselage-mounted air brakes to manage high-speed dives during the Korean War. The McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II relied on them in Vietnam to control approach speeds and bombing runs. Each time a pilot deployed those panels to shed velocity, maintain position, or prepare for landing, they were applying the same principle Booth had proven in a moment of fear: drag on demand. What had begun as an accident became doctrine, and doctrine rarely preserves the names of the individuals who created it. The story resurfaced decades later. In the late 1980s, aviation historian Dr. James H. Hall was researching the P-47 Thunderbolt. While reviewing declassified mission records of the 56th Fighter Group, he noticed repeated references to gear extension recovery. April 1944. Authorized for emergency use. May 1944. Diving losses within the group reduced by 18%. Hall wanted to know who initiated it. Was it Zemke? Gabreski? He traced the paperwork backward through official memoranda. In Colonel Zemke's authorization for the test flight, and scribbled in the margin of a maintenance log, he found the name: Second Lieutenant R. Booth. Hall located Booth in retirement. He was living in a modest house with a porch swing and a garden thick with tomato plants. When Hall knocked on the screen door and asked about the gear brake maneuver, Booth looked puzzled. "You mean the time I grabbed the wrong handle?" Booth said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mr. Booth," Hall replied, "that was not merely a mistake. It was the first practical combat solution to Mach Tuck. Your work appears in engineering texts. They just do not attach your name to it." Booth smiled softly. It was not embarrassment. It was humility. "I did not do it for textbooks," he said, glancing up at the sky where a commercial airliner left a thin white contrail. "I did it because I did not want to die, and I figured if it worked for me, it might help the other fellows." Robert Booth's story is more than an anecdote from wartime. It is a reminder of how innovation actually happens. We often imagine progress as orderly, scientists at chalkboards, equations solved in laboratories. But in moments where survival is at stake, advancement is rarely neat. It emerges from fear, from urgency, from mistakes. Penicillin was discovered by accident. The microwave oven was an unintended result of experimentation. And the answer to the most lethal aerodynamic trap of the Second World War came from a frightened 19-year-old who pulled the wrong lever because he needed to slow down before the ground arrived. The brilliance was not in the motion of his hand. Any terrified pilot could have reached for the wrong control. The breakthrough was not the accidental pull of a lever. It was what followed. Booth could have buried the entire episode. He could have landed, blamed rough air, cleaned the sweat from his face, and said nothing about nearly tearing the landing gear from the wings. His reputation would have remained intact. There would have been no questioning, no risk of discipline. Instead, he reported it. He told his commanding officer exactly what happened. He allowed engineers and senior pilots to examine the aircraft and challenge his account. Because he spoke openly, the discovery did not stay in one cockpit. It spread. And because it spread, pilots stopped dying in compressibility dives. That is what professionalism looks like. It is not the absence of error. It is the willingness to transform an error into a lesson that protects others. Robert Booth died in 1991. He never published a memoir. He did not tour speaking halls. He never asked for money to recount his story. Yet every time a jet fighter deploys its air brakes, or a commercial airliner lowers panels to slow during descent, the principle he proved in combat is at work. The history of war is not shaped only by famous generals. It is shaped by mechanics, by inexperienced pilots, by farm boys who improvised under pressure, and by quiet individuals who solved problems when survival demanded it. If you believe Robert Booth's story deserves a place in memory, support it. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. What is the most powerful accidental invention you know, whether from war or from everyday life? Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want more stories about the overlooked people who shaped aviation and military history. Tell us where you are watching from and whether anyone in your family ever served.